Indiana here with another episode of the Star Wars podcast. Today's episode is about what if Obi-Wan Kenobi turned to the dark side. Now, normally for these videos, I will have some prepared notes and whatnot that I then add on to as I do the video. For this one, I haven't done any such thing. So, if I am rambling on or whatnot more than usual, then that's why I'm going to try go more detail in different spots than normal as well here. So, with Obi-Wan's life, I think there are four major instances I see where Obi-Wan is likely turned to the dark side. The first being his master's death on Naboo when Darth Maul kills him. The second would be when Count Dooku tempts him to the dark side on Geonosis. The third would be when, forgetting her name, but the Duchess of Mandalore dies when Darth Maul kills her. The third being Anakin turning to the dark side. Now, most of these are caused by the fall or death of people close to him. The one that's not connected in a similar manner is Count Dooku's tempting him to the dark side. And that's probably also the one he was least likely to fall to the dark side during. But I feel there are different consequences that go along with each of these, as each of them are based around a different situation and different period of time during the events of the Clone Wars. So, let's get to the first one. Qui-Gon Jinn's death. So, if Darth Maul turned to the dark side, if Obi-Wan turned to the dark side at this moment, what is most likely to happen? Well, the most obvious thing is Obi-Wan's not going to train Anakin. Obi-Wan only trains Anakin because that was what his masters wished him to do. But if he turns to the dark side, he's not going to end up training Anakin, and Anakin's not going to end up becoming a Jedi. Why? Because the Jedi Council was unwilling to train Anakin because he thought he was too old. And at that point, they were pretty strict on their rules. It wasn't like Luke Skywalker becoming a Jedi because he was the only Jedi they could possibly train that they thought could take down Vader. So, he doesn't become a Jedi. Anakin goes back to his mother or finds a job elsewhere where he is able to raise money to free his mother. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan goes on his dark side rage. Now, if Obi-Wan wants to become a full Sith Lord, he's going to have to somehow get in contact with Palpatine. Palpatine, we know, is the one who trains Dooku and had trained Darth Maul. Dooku was a fallen Jedi himself. We don't know his exact fall from the dark side, so we don't know how Darth Sidious got in contact with them. But it's likely, if Palpatine finds out about Obi-Wan Kenobi's fall to the dark side, one of two things is likely. Either Palpatine's going to kill him, or he's going to ask Obi-Wan to be his apprentice. With the recent death of Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan being the one who killed Darth Maul, then what's most likely to happen is he asks him to join him. If Obi-Wan says no to joining him, which if he fell to the dark side I would think unlikely at this moment, then Obi-Wan would then become Darth Sidious's apprentice. Now, being his apprentice, the Jedi Council is going to know that Obi-Wan is now a Sith Lord and is being trained in the way of the Sith. It's likely to come after them like they tried going after Count Dooku. Now, the problem is Obi-Wan compared to Dooku doesn't have the same ties and connections. He does have some, such as, well, I don't know if all these connections would have been made yet, So really, he would have been more of a Darth Maul type figure, where he was basically doing his master's bidding and not able to go out and do stuff on his own like Dooku. Basically, at this point, he would be under the guise of Palpatine, waiting for the galaxy to be taken over. Palpatine, if he never took on Dooku as an apprentice as well, which he may have, knowing that Palpatine has had multiple Sith or kinda Siths under his belt in other parts of canon, may have had Dooku at the same time as Kenobi, which would have made the Clone Wars a much more interesting time, having two Sith Lord apprentices, both working on the same side. So this would also influence some battles, as Obi-Wan was one of the major generals of the Clone Wars. But aside from him not training Anakin, and Anakin would be a really major thing as well, because Anakin was probably one of the more effective generals during the Clone Wars. Anakin goes on to win many battles for the Jedi in a good manner, not the manner of Pong Krell, who is also a fallen Jedi who turned to the dark side, but in good manner. He had R2-D2 and whatnot as well, but basically, and he trains Ahsoka, so if Anakin never becomes a Jedi, then Ahsoka isn't trained by Anakin and doesn't follow the same path she originally went on. Anyways, what I was getting to is Anakin is a major proponent in winning some battles, same with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and both these Jedi would not be part of the Clone Wars, not be able to have the same sort of victories they had before, and major influence over the war. So I would say with this point of Obi-Wan turning, that's the most major effect. Now let's get to the next one. Count Dooku's temptation. So, if you've seen episode 2, basically Count Dooku explains the situation they're in to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan never takes in much light, and when he tells the Jedi Council, they don't really believe it. And Count Dooku told the situation as is, in a truthworthy manner, but he's a Sith Lord, so they didn't trust him. But let's say Obi-Wan did trust him, and for some reason, he decided to turn at this point, which is the most unlikely point for Obi-Wan to turn at, as he wasn't feeling any misery. We've seen what would happen if Obi-Wan turned pre-Clone Wars period. This is what he would happen if he turned at the very start of the Clone Wars. So, again, at this point, if he's tempted by Count Dooku's truths and Count Dooku's offer, he would become Dooku's apprentice, so to say, or kind of a Asajj Ventress type role. He wouldn't necessarily be Asajj Ventress, and I would believe Ventress would still work for Dooku, so he wouldn't be a complete replacement, but he would become a general. Anakin would still be general in the Clone Wars, but still at this point he would never come to train Luke Skywalker, or at least introduce Luke Skywalker dark side. Now someone else may have replaced Obi-Wan Kenobi's role, but we don't know who that may be, or it may have had to have been Yoda himself, which I would say is also very unlikely. But anyways, I'll get more than that after Anakin's fall to the dark side. Yeah, that one. Anyways, so if Obi-Wan turned at this point, Obi-Wan's going to become a general. It's going to have the same effects as the last one would have, where Obi-Wan wouldn't have had the same influence as he had on the Clone Wars. Now let's say what some of this influence is. Now later in the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan is effective in battles such as Ord Mantell, Umbara, but early on, these are the ones I'm going to focus on. He was influential with Cad Bane. Cad Bane is going to do several things, such as the Holocron heist, and Holocron Heist and the Zero the Hutt. The main one is the Holocron Heist, however, that Obi-Wan is most involved with. And Anakin was also involved here in Ahsoka, but basically he wouldn't have been able to have the role he had there, as well as his role in the invasion of Geonosis, which was very necessary, in his role where he was one of the main generals, and his role in the Battle of Ryloth, which was the recapturing of the landing point. So without his lead in these situations, these battles would have taken a very different turn without being able to follow his judgment. And several of the clones he was in charge of wouldn't have been able to take the direction they did in the Clone Wars, such as, why am I forgetting their names? Anyways, there were several clones on that landing point at Ryloth that, because of Obi-Wan's kind of direction, they took a different path than they may have under a different Jedi general, such as if Pong Krell was leading them instead, they would have likely died, because that was what Pong Krell did. He killed his clones, basically. Anyways, Obi-Wan would have been a general for the other side again, and these effective wins that Obi-Wan helped with would have been turned to the other side, or wouldn't have happened in the same effective manner. Which is probably, again, the least different thing. Now, the next time Obi-Wan's most likely to turn to the dark side is when the Duchess of Mandalore dies. The backstory behind this one is he kind of had a love relationship with her. He was never able to actually date her or anything because of the Jedi Code that didn't allow for that, but he loved her. It's hinted at, and it was an Anakin type situation where if he could have, he would have married her. Now, Anakin actually did marry her, but Obi-Wan didn't. And he was unable to protect her from death when Darth Maul killed her. And since he loved her so much, and seeing her fall, he could have, just like when he saw his master die, turned to the dark side possibly. Now, this is in the middle of the war. There are a couple of other Jedi that kind of turned to the dark side in the middle of the war. The main one coming to mind is Pong Krell. I think Quinlan Vos may have as well. I'm not up to date on Quinlan Vos' story. But the point is these are other Jedi that... And then we also see a couple of other re-emerging Jedi, or re-emerging Sith, such as Savage Opress and Darth Maul, during the Clone Wars. And so, I think if he turned to the dark side at this point, he would not have joined Count Dooku on Palpatine's side. This is a distinct difference from him turning to the dark side the other two times, because any Jedi that turned to the dark side, or any re-emerging Sith that came back during the middle of the war, did not join their side. For example, Pong Krell went and took his own path and decided to simply do things the way he wanted. Quinlan Vos sort of took a rogue type situation, and Darth Maul and his brother Savage Opress decided to take over the underworld, which was an area Palpatine was not influential in, as their way of gaining an empire. So Obi-Wan would take this sort of role if he fell to the dark side at this point. And the other similarity is these people either never really gain much major influence or die pretty quickly. So it's likely that if Obi-Wan turned to the dark side at this point, he would be hunted down and killed by one of the two sides, either the Republic or Palpatine. For example, Palpatine goes to Maul and Savage Opress whenever he sees their empire that threatens his reign. Pong Krell is killed rather quickly by the clones he turns against on Umbara. as I said, I'm not up to date on Quinlan Voss's story. Asajj Ventress simply becomes a bounty hunter and isn't a major threat. So he would have to take some sort of minor role that wasn't as important if he were to stay alive. That also would mean he wouldn't be influential in the war anymore if he turned to the dark side and wanted to live at this point. Otherwise, he's going to be hunted down after by one of the two sides. It doesn't really matter. If he gains too much influence, the Palpatine's going to want to hunt him down. And if he still doesn't have any influence or is recognized in many places, the Republic is going to be looking for him either way. So it will be difficult for Obi-Wan to actually gain anything. Now, compared to the other people that fell, I think if Obi-Wan wanted to gain some influence, protective influence, he has one friend that is likely to help him, even though he's turned to the dark side, and that is Hondo Ohnaka. Now, Hondo Ohnaka liked Jedi, and we don't know how he would necessarily react to Obi-Wan being on the dark side, but as long as Obi-Wan wasn't threatening to harm him or anything, and was willing to work mutually with them, it's possible that Hondo Ohnaka would be willing to give Obi-Wan protection for his help. Now, how likely that is, I would be uncertain, because I feel like Ohnaka appreciated Obi-Wan's Jedi qualities. But it's still possible that having turned to the dark side, as long as Obi-Wan was able to offer some sort of service in return, that Ohnaka would protect them or maybe even work alongside Obi-Wan if he turned in the middle of the war. And this is what, again, this occurred in the middle of the war. So let's get to the last one. The last time Obi-Wan was likely to turn to the dark side was when Anakin turns to the dark side. Now, this should be an obvious point. Now, I think this is probably the second least likely, Qui-Gon Jinn being the most, Dutchess of Mandalore being the second most likely for him to turn to the dark side. This would be the third most likely, and the least likely would be Count Dooku's temptation. But the reason why I would think this is the third most likely or the second least likely to occur is because he's seen Anakin turn to the dark side is going to try his best not to follow the same path. Now, let's say Obi-Wan doesn't sort of follow this to his best ability, is really beaten up over the fact that Anakin turns to the dark side. The main effect of this one, now this is the effect of any of them, but the main effect of this one is that Obi-Wan will not train Luke. Luke goes on to save the rebellion and destroys the first Death Star and brings Vader back to the light side, allowing the Emperor to then be killed and basically saving the rebellion and thus creating the new republic within that year. Now, of the second Death Star being destroyed. Now, if Obi-Wan turns to the dark side, now none of that would happen because Obi-Wan would not follow that path to trying to protect the future of the Jedi, which he sees in Luke, because he's not going to care about the Jedi much longer. If he did follow up with Luke, he's more likely to try to tempt him to the dark side and never even take him to his aunt and uncle on Tatooine, which you never know could happen, but it's unlikely that Palpatine would allow a full-fledged Sith Lord to exist that wasn't Palpatine himself, because he didn't allow Darth Maul and Savage Opress to exist if he found out about Obi-Wan trying to raise Luke. Now, the other option is, with him turning dark side, is he is brought into the ranks of Palpatine's New Order, which is possible. I wouldn't say it's possible with Vader being Palpatine's sidekick, but let's say this does happen. Now, we know that Palpatine has the Inquisitors. About 15, 20 years into his reign, he has all these other people that he's having challenge Vader for Vader's position as his main apprentice type figure. And so it is possible, with them not having this full confidence in Vader yet or whatnot, that Obi-Wan takes a second apprentice type role and he has two apprentices. Or he takes some sort of other role in his order as a general or something that with high respect. Now, as I said, I don't think this is likely. I think it's more likely Obi-Wan as a Dark Lord carves out some little empire that Palpatine doesn't really care about and stays off his radar. That's not too big, like Darth Maul's empire got way too big. You know, sort of like Jabba the Hutt smuggling type empire type thing. I don't think, again, if Obi-Wan is to live, he can't, unless he were to somehow kill Palpatine, which he doesn't have the skills for. He has the skills for taking on Anakin or Darth Vader, but he doesn't have the technical skill for defeating Palpatine. The only Jedi I saw with that skill would be Mace Windu, Yoda, or Count Dooku before he was turned to the dark side, because those were all the most skilled of the Jedi. Obi-Wan isn't to this point. Yes, he was on the High Council. He could possibly hold off a fight against Palpatine for a few minutes, but it's unlikely he'd be able to kill Palpatine with his high swordsmanship skills. Now, in older age, he may be able to, but then again, Obi-Wan would be at an older age himself. And we never really see what Palpatine's skill is at. All we see is his style of manipulation, and not his lightsaber skills in episode 6. So it's possible. We don't really know. Now Obi-Wan could train himself to be good enough to take on Palpatine and then rule the Empire himself or something if he turns to the dark side. But I think Obi-Wan would be more the type in situations 3 or 4 to carve out his own little small smuggling type empire or whatnot, and do evil things. I don't know what an evil Obi-Wan would necessarily want to do other than save his loved ones. But again, this is the last point I think Obi-Wan is likely to turn to the dark side. Again, I think this one is unlikely because he sees Anakin turn to the dark side, and unless he gives in to his grief, which he's not going to want to do normally, but he could, unless he gives in to this grief, he's not going to turn to the dark side. Instead, in the actual timeline, he hopes for the future. So, anyways, these are the 4 times I think Obi-Wan is most likely to turn to the dark side. Let me know if there's any other points you think he could turn to the dark side, or your theories about what if Obi-Wan turned to the dark side. These are simply my ideas of what would happen if Obi-Wan turns to the dark side. Leave your comments down below. Thanks for listening. This is Minecraft Indiana signing out.